Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Contour community meeting. I'll be your host today. My name is Jonas Roslin. Together with me, I have the entire Contour team and a bunch of community members. So welcome, everyone. We are recording this. We'll post it up on YouTube afterwards. So if you miss anything, you can always watch it later. And if you have any questions, please feel free to just unmute yourself and speak up. Or if your mic isn't working today, or if you're in a location where it doesn't work, just type out your questions in the chat and I'll raise it. I'm going to share my screen here. I'm going to share the agenda so everyone can see it. We've got a bunch of stuff that I want to talk about today. So the first thing is Envoy 1.11.1, which Dave is going to cover. Then we're going to look at what we've been working on, what's coming up here. And we're going to go through a bunch of good first issues for the 1.00 milestone. So if you are looking to get involved, if you are looking for issues that would be a good first issue for you, this is definitely the place for that. So with that, Dave, you wanna take it all over here?
Sure. Welcome, everybody. So before we get into what's happened in the previous release and what's coming up, there's an important kind of PSA, which is we have to talk about the HTTP vulnerabilities that were discovered in Envoy. And to be fair, not just Envoy. It looks like Netflix sat down, had a look at the HTTP specification, like, there are some ambiguities here. I wonder what would happen if I sent a random server on the internet this packet. And so this set of HTTP vulnerabilities affects pretty much every implementation out there. Goes, Envoys. I haven't checked Nginx. I'm sure everybody who's doing HTTP 2 has been scrambling. What this means for us as Envoy users is that the only shipping version of Envoy that contains these fixes is Envoy 1.11.1. They have not backport them to 1.10 or any earlier version. You must upgrade, period. Now, we maintain a fairly strong coincidence between Envoy releases and Contour releases. And so in concert with the Envoy developers, we have 1.11.12 and so many releases. 0.14.2 and 0.15. So honestly, you should just upgrade to 0.15. Like, why stay on the old busted? Come to the new stuff. But the key here is that, unfortunately, you don't have a choice to not upgrade. Envoy have not backported this fix. You must upgrade. That's just the deal of the game. This is open source. So, are there any questions around that? Around what the issues are? About how does that impact Contour? You can feel free to ask. In terms of how this affects Contour as like its components in the Kubernetes structure, we don't expose HTTP to HTTP2 to the outside world. The only port we expose is for just the health check and your debug and your stats and traditional stuff you do inside cluster. The listening port, the service, is connected to Envoy, which is connected to the outside world. So this is an issue that affects Envoy. I've put a link in the show notes to the Envoy release notes. Just like a lawyer, I'm not a security white hat, so I will not pretend to interpret these things for you. You should read the CVEs yourself and determine your own level of severity and exposure. But the straight up version is, this is pretty serious. It affected all the HTTP implementations. You need to upgrade. Okay, here ended the lesson.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, the release went out of Contour 0.14.2 went out immediately when this new Envoy release was published, right?
Yep.
Awesome. There are no questions in the chat, so I think we should be moving on. So what have we been working on, Dave?
Cool. Well, the good news is I get to pass this around a little bit to the rest of the team. The main features for 0.15, I know I sit down, I say this every time that I write the research. I'm like, damn, we got a lot done. It's good to step back and like take an overview when you've been down in the weeds working on it. for so long. The one that I will cover and then hand over to Nick is, in a few releases ago, we added the ability to secure the communication between Envoy and Contour. This is using mutual TLS. We have a job that generates all the certificates for you, and we set up Contour and Envoy to use those certificates via secrets. It all works pretty seamlessly. The goal of this is the end goal, which I'll come back to in the what's coming up, is that we want to make what we call the split deployment, splitting Contour and Envoy pods into their own life cycles. And the key to that is being able to secure that traffic between it. In 0.14, we added the ability to do that. In 0.15, we have made it explicit. You have to either choose to opt in to provide TLS credentials, or you have to choose to opt out with -- insecure. This is a breaking change to your deployment. If you don't have this flag, Contour, and you just, instead of reading our upgrade document, you've just gone in and edited your deployment and gone from 0.14.2 to 0.15, it's not going to start up. It's going to give you a very clear message that says you need to either provide TLS credentials or use -- insecure. The reason for this is that insecure mode is kind of in its name not the one we want you to use. You would only use this if you were co-deploying your pods, your Contour and your Envoys in kind of like a little kind cluster or something like that. For the real world, you either should you should be using mutual TLS between your services to secure and authenticate that connection, and also so that's how you should be going down in the real world. And so over the last couple of releases, we've been moving towards that position. And so that's the important change there. So we made it very explicit. Like, there's no way that you could just kind of edit your image version and be like, it seems to be working, and then, oh, I was accidentally working in insecure mode. I didn't realize that. By making this explicit, you either have to provide TLS key material or explicitly pass Contour serve -- insecure. You have to choose at that point. So there is no way that you can accidentally fall into an unexpected mode. You choose at this point. Nick, I'm going to hand over to you now to talk about leader election that landed in 0.15, how it applies to this split deployment, and possibly finish up a little bit like where it's going to go in the next release.
Sure, Dave. Hi, everyone. I'm Nick. So the idea behind leader election is to make it so that Contour can run and handle transient single pod failures reasonably quickly. And we were hoping to get some stuff out of it as well about the other advantage that we were hoping to get down the track is to make it easier to update the old status things by having a single writer back. The current model is that when you turn leader election on with the -- enable leader election flag, Contour will use the Contour config map in the Heptio Contour namespace, and it will use that as a distributed lock and elect a leader. The way that the Contour processes work is that they will do most of their startup, but when it comes time to actually present the gRPC endpoint, that is the XDS endpoint that Envoy actually talks to, only the leader will present the endpoint. And so that what that means is that all of the envoys will only be able to connect to the leader. Obviously, if you're using a deployment where you have both of them in the same pod, don't turn leader election on because a lot of your envoys won't work anymore. But if you are using the split deployment, which, as we said, is going to be the default very soon, then it should really help with making sure that in the event that your primary Contour goes away, another one is there to pick up the slack. The downsides of this at the moment are the current model is that you have to change your deployment to be a recreate deployment rather than a rolling update, because in order to make this work, we've needed to change the readiness probe on the pods so that only the master ever becomes ready. And that means that because only the master ever becomes ready, a rolling deployment will never complete. So there's another piece of work to change this leader election model to one more like the API server, where you can have, where each contour can be basically a read replica, and one contour will be elected as the boss, and that boss will be the one that does the writing. And so that's sort of forthcoming. I'm hoping to land that in beta 1, but we'll see how we go.
Hi, can I ask a question?
Sure.
Absolutely.
I work at the big institution that Josh Rosso and Alexander Brand are working at. And whenever I see leader election, I sort of panic a little bit just in terms of what that means running a leader election system. And so do I think about this like a leader election system in terms of a traditional zookeeper, or is this like backed by etcd? Like what's actually doing the consensus part of this, or am I thinking of this the wrong way?
You're thinking of it.
Let me take this. This is the stock Kubernetes leader election. It is the same code that the API server uses and all the other components use to choose a leader.
Okay.
Yep. Functionally, what it does is it uses annotations currently it uses annotations on a config map as the sort of locking mechanism. All of the instances watch the config map. The annotation says which one's the leader. That one becomes the leader, and there's a bunch of channels and stuff that you use in Go to make it all play.
Okay, so there's no sort of, you're not bringing your own consensus here. This is just using Kubernetes primitives that are used throughout the system anyway.
Absolutely, this is using the Kubernetes leader election package.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yep. The other thing to point out that Contour is not in the traffic path. It does not need to be online to serve traffic. It would be good because that's how you send configuration changes, but it is not in the traffic path.
Yeah, it makes sense. Thank you.
Cool. The other part of leader election, other than the main goal for leader election, is we have to choose a leader because they are the one to update the status. Leader election at the moment is what we call opt-in. You opt into a -- leader enable leader election. In the future, we're going to hope to make that default. So we either change that default or just change that to say disable leader election, or we just turn it on when it seems reasonable. The goal for that at the moment, we only have by only exposing the gRPC port on the leader contour, that causes all the envoys to follow that one, and they get their configuration. Each of them get the same configuration. We're probably going to move as we evolve leader election to a model where only the leader has the authority to write back status, so it's a consistent status stream. But we may choose to, as the API server does, effectively have read-only followers. I'm not going to use the S word; that's not appropriate. So that will let rather than everybody dogpiling on one contour, then potentially you can spread the load across many. We haven't come to the decisions there, but the model of leader election is that one of the contours is driving this is the most up to date state, and all the envoys connect to that. Cool. Any other questions?
I have other questions, but not about leader election.
Okay, cool. Well, we'll move on then. The next one I want to talk about is the config file. We added a configuration file in 0.14. The goal of that is to capture configuration changes which aren't at the route or virtual host level. So obviously we all know about the route level, like what servers, load balancer, blah, blah, blah. The virtual host is effectively the TLS properties, things like that. But there probably needs to be a layer above that, a kind of administrator level of in the scope of for this contour installation, these things apply. And so that was why we created the configuration file. Now in 0.14 it was mute, but in 0.15 we've added a few configuration properties which fit into this cluster. I was going to say cluster wide. That's if you have one contour installed, but certainly installation wide. The properties for this installation. I haven't talked to you about this before, Steve, but would you feel okay talking about the role of disable, permit, insecure, and min protocol version? Is that okay? Otherwise, I can do it. Whatever.
Yeah, no, it's fine. Sure, I can take those. Yeah.
So Steve did the work on these, so it's good that you should talk about them.
That's only fair, right? Yeah.
I think the original issues for this were either raised by us directly or raised on our behalf. So these are two things that we absolutely need and want, and we plan on rolling out before our sort of GA. So this is great.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, so the just for everyone else, if they haven't not familiar, there's a way that if you specify TLS secrets on an ingress route, by default we kind of like follow good standards. So the idea is if we see that you want to present certificates on a listener, then we'll assume that you're going to want TLS, right? So a lot of other ingress resources require you to annotate your ingress resource and say, hey, when I receive a request over a plain HTTP, then force a 301 redirect back to the secure endpoint. So ingress route kind of takes it as if when we see that secret on that ingress route, we're going to assume you want a TLS endpoint. So we'll automatically do that. So you don't have to annotate or set that configuration. So when a request comes again on insecure, we'll just automatically redirect. But there are times where you might want to actually serve both endpoints, serve the plain HTTP as well as the secure listener. So in the ingress route, there's a way you can specify, hey, I have these routes, but for this specific path, let this still serve an insecure path. The problem comes is if we have delegation. So delegation is a way to help allow users to self-manage their own ingress resources. And it does it in a way that lets you specify where what they can and can't do within the cluster, again, to help protect them and protect all the other users. So the problem came is that there was no way to limit what folks could do in terms of permitting the insecure. So if an administrator wanted to require that 301 redirect everywhere, users still had the ability to set that on their route. So basically they could override kind of what an administrator would want. So now if you set this disable permit insecure in the config file, users, if they try and set that on their ingress routes, it'll get disabled or ignored and thrown away. So that's that disable permit insecure. The same thing kind of follows for the TLS min protocol. So there's a way that you can now specify, again, across all of those ingress routes, what we define as administrator, what we want to have as the minimum protocol version. And again, these are all configuration items in that config file. Does that make sense? Did I miss anything, Dave?
No, that's it. TLS is in its own kind of like little block because we don't have any direct plans, but it seems reasonable that there will be other kind of TLS parameters. I know a long time ago, there was a call to make ciphers editable. We kind of put that off for the moment by saying, well, let's just do what gives people the A+. But so we figured that there will be another place that we would need to put other TLS stuff. And so that's why it's in its own key. But definitely min protocol version basically lets you raise the minimum from 1.1, which is the default up, and also prevents users from raising it below that, from lowering it below that. So if you have an organizational requirement to use 1.2 everywhere, this is how you do it. And you not only remove the requirement for every author to go and add 1.2 to their virtual host, but you also remove their ability to countermand that by setting 1.1. So that's the goal to this feature. Michael, do you have any feedback on this?
No, this is great. I mean, we want to be able to set both of these at a cluster level. So in order for us to host any sort of application that's subject to regulatory stuff, we have an internal name for it called Critical Application Framework, or any sort of future PCI, SOX compliant, any of that sort of stuff. We need to specify and enforce a non-changeable minimum TLS version, so which is a 1.2. So this is great.
So, as a user, can I put you on the spot about the choice of config map versus indeterminate CLI flags? Like what works for you?
That's a good question. I probably need to go back to our team to work out sort of what satisfies our internal control. Because not only do we have to be able to say it's 1.2 is the minimum, we need to be able to say it can't be changed by someone, some sort of rogue action. So I'll have to check with our internal team, but I sort of think that having this in a config file is probably better. It would make it harder for someone to change is my thinking, but I'll have to double check.
It's the standard config map is mounted as a volume, and it's mounted as the file in the volume, and it's made available, /config.yaml, that classic pattern. Part of the reason why we added a configuration file, behind the scenes, some configuration, there's a hierarchy. Configuration file to environment variables to flags specified directly. That's always the hierarchy. We could have added minimum protocol version or disabled insecure as flags on the deployment. Part of the problem there is that that meant that all the deployments would change at the same time. Like you're changing the spec for the deployment. Potentially using a config file that you stage that, as in you want to change the config map, bump one of the pods, it will get rebuilt from the same spec. But the most important, there are probably different ways of doing it. We did expect that almost all big shops would have some kind of Ansible or Helm or templating or something like that, which is their way of building their part of their deployment parts. So yes. YAML in a config map was not the worst thing, but the real clincher was there are some things that we can't really express well in CLI flags. One of the and when we get to what's coming up next, one of the grandfathered in tickets is the ability to do JSON logging, and expressing a JSON logging format string as like a bunch of CLI flags would just be a disaster of shell quoting. So right. That was the main reason why we created a config file, so we could put that in. But it's always a question of, should we put it in a config file? Should we have a flag? Should we do it as both? Some have both. Like for example, you can specify the location of your kube config at both the config level and the flag level.
I'll check. Our team in India is doing most of this work, and I know we're trying to get to 0.15. So I'll check with them. But I think as it currently is, I think it's okay. But if there's any reason for us to have concern there, I'll make sure I get back to you.
The way we built it is very, very cheap to move or kind of allow things to be set in multiple locations. And there's a well-defined precedence. Like it doesn't change on a per flag level. It's always config file, environment variable, flag on the command line. That always is the way it goes. So it's very cheap for us to change. I almost said said trivial, but I'm not going to say that because Tim will yell at me. But it is we built this in such a way that it is not a major engineering undertaking to make these little moves. Like we need a flag to override the config file. Easy, just raise a ticket. Okay, where are we at? Kind of halfway through the hour, so maybe I'll hand it back to Jonas, and I guess we'll talk about what's coming up in the future of Contour.
Yeah, I just had one quick question here regarding MTLS or -- insecure. In a previous community meeting, you talked about how easy it was now to use a secure method of communication between Envoy and Contour. So do you have a real use case where -- insecure would actually be used or preferred?
The use case that we have in mind, so to answer, I need to step back a little bit and say the goal is to move to split deployment. And just to define what split deployment means for us is contours live in a deployment, your classic deployment. Envoys live in a daemon set. There is no value in having more than one envoy running per host. That's not the way you scale them out. And that also opens the door very easily to host networking if you want to enable that. But the key is, regardless of host networking or daemon set versus deployment, envoys and contours have different life lifetimes. Like an Envoy has a lot of traffic going through it. You probably don't want to bounce it every time you change your contour config to pick up a new configuration change. So the goal that we've been working over the last couple of releases is to separate them into different pods, so they into different sets of pods, so they have different lifetimes. Now that means, well, how are you going to communicate across them if they're not sharing the same local host networking? You need to secure that traffic. So to answer the question of where does insecure fit in, it would only be in the cases where you had chosen to deploy them co-located. You're like, well, they're just talking over loopback. They don't need to encrypt their communication. No one else can talk over local host. We're fine with that. We're in the process of updating the deployment manifests, and we're basically going to get to a stage where instead of the 4, I think it was 5 last time, we've been slowly whittling them down. There are just 2: split deployment and development, or local host, or something like that. So and that would not include any replicas. That's just one contour, one Envoy in a pod. There you go. So that's suitable for if you're in a small cluster, you're doing the kind deployment, something like that, Minikube, something like that. So insecure in its name implies you probably don't use insecure things in production. So it's probably not a production idea.
Okay, yeah, that explains it perfectly. Thank you so much. Yeah, I'm running Contour in kind, so on my laptop here, so that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, so the last thing you want is for us to have a replica set of three contours and 2 Envoys, which are all going to be stuffed onto the one machine. That's the goal. We realize that the split deployment model can't scale all the way down. We want to have a reasonable number of replicas and a reasonable number of both the daemon set and the deployment. So we realize that there's a limit we can scale it down, and so we retain the minus insecure option for doing this kind of what do we used to call it in the OpenStack world, the dev cloud world. Everything running on your machine.
Cool, thank you. Any other questions regarding what the team has been working on?
I actually have one more question. So it's related to the shutdown stuff and daemon sets versus deployments. So you might be aware we've got we think is a larger networking issue that has to do with us repaving some of our clusters, and we get into an ARP issue. And I think we're going to switch to a deployment versus daemon set. I know there's been some work in terms of the shutdown and sig term versus sig kill and stuff. I just wondering, is there any takeaway? I know I should go off and read that in more detail, but any updates there in terms of what you're working on or what's coming?
Okay, so before I answer that, super quickly, we are going to give examples with a daemon set. Sophisticated users, we say they're just examples, like they're just starting points that you can, because we can't possibly document all the different ways to work with cloud providers, as well as the infinite set of bare metal clusters. So deployment versus daemon set for your Envoys is very much a matter of personal choice.
Okay.
They both well. In terms of shutdown, one thing that we did fix in the manifest for 0.15, the way that when in the pre-shutdown hook that Kubernetes uses, we say to Envoy, change your health state. There's a curl you can make to the admin interface that says make your health checks fail, so that in the hope that will boot it out of the upstream load balancer. If you have one. In terms of cleanly shutting down Envoy, this is something that the Envoy developers don't seem, maybe I should pass this to Nick, but this is something that the Envoy developers don't seem to be really on board with. They're usually like, well, stop giving it traffic, don't ask it to reject traffic. Maybe Nick could speak more about this, because I know you've been looking at this recently.
Yeah, basically, the way the Envoy developers want Envoy to work is they kind of say there's no real way to have the proxy sort of hard stop taking traffic because that might cut existing connections. So what you can do is you can trigger a thing that says like start draining, which means cut idle connections, start trying to drain, and it will try to drain. It won't ever hard cut connections, but it will sort of, you know, be a bit more aggressive about cutting idle connections and stuff like that or something. I haven't read the exact code, but the idea is it'll start draining and sort of give a suggestion. Then the idea is you start draining, you wait some period of time, and then once the envoy goes away, you'll have minimized the amount of traffic that was passing through that envoy. I mean, obviously you'll never be able to completely eliminate the possibility there might be some traffic going through it, but that's the best that you're going to be able to get with the way that envoy is built. And so that's what all of this stuff about the pre-stop hooks and stuff is about trying to find the best way to send envoy the signal, which is sent via a HTTP post request. So to send envoy the signal and then allow enough time before the pod actually gets proper killed by Kubernetes and then restart it again. So that most of the connections will have been drained and moved off somewhere else. The other thing that happens is that when you tell it to start draining, Envoy will set its health endpoint will start returning unhealthy. So that means that as far as Kubernetes is concerned, it will be removed from load balancers and stuff like that. Any load balancer health checks that are health checking Envoy will notice that that Envoy is now unhealthy and will stop sending traffic to it. So the idea is that you're kind of draining by using the next level upstream load balancer. In the Kubernetes case, that's the service object. In the in the case that you're using like some other sort of networking and you're going directly to the envoys, that'll be your next hop upstream load balancer. And the thing that we added with the SIG term is related but slightly different. That's actually for Contour, not for Envoy. And that, so basically, if that does for Contour, that means that when you send a SIG term, it will cleanly shut down all of the different threads that Go routines, that Contour is running, not just sort of have them be hard killed. And hope the idea that will also let us simulate sort of this has failed in a weird way kind of things.
Makes sense. Thank you.
No problem.
Awesome. Thank you. So I think we're moving towards what's coming up.
Right. This is the more kind of aspirational part of the session. The key thing is that we're gearing up for a 1.0 release at KubeCon in just over 2 months from now. So we have to get ourselves into a mindset of a development freeze. This means we have to focus on a set of features. We were really hoping to get the development milestone, that 0 to 15 will be our last development milestone. A few things have slipped over and grandfathered into beta 1, but the key takeaway is that from now until our first beta, which is September 20th, we might do 1 or 2 release candidates. We are looking to stabilize that set of features. We're not open for new feature requests. We would love to have them, and then there is a milestone called the unplanned milestone, which but I took that name from the Go project. It's perhaps poorly named. I mean, maybe we should just call it after 1.1, but after 1.0. But we have to draw a line in the sand of things that we can get done for 1.0 rather than continuing to like leave the boat at the dock. So that's the mindset we're very much in polishing, in working on polishing the current features that we have for our 1.0 release. What will happen in a month, in 6 weeks? Thomas Boomore and I will sit down and we'll look at the big tickets in the backlog for things that we didn't include in 1.0, and we'll make some calls about those. Mainly around like what are answering questions like how will this what am I trying to say? Rather than playing feature bingo, we really want to look at how will a particular enhancement allow people to use Contour in a way that they probably can't. Some good examples of that are having a better story around authentication, potentially having a better story around IPv6. No one really owns IPv6 at the moment. Don't over-index too much on that. Maybe the IPv6 story isn't super important. I think that's really kind of a regional thing, depending on where you are in the world. IPv6 seems to be kind of culturally specific. But those are the kind of things we're looking at, rather than tackling things like, oh, I can't put an IPv6 address in here. We'll look more holistically and say, should we put some resources on making the IPv6 story better? Should we put some resources on having a more comprehensive answer to how do I authenticate? How do I put an authentication story in front of onboarding Contour? So that'll be the way we're looking at it. But that's up to November. But the big push for the next 2 months or so is on finishing the beta 1 backlog and going through polishing up what we'd be happy to call a 1.0 release. But before I get into the next bullet point, the one thing that we are in that vein we are pushing is that we're going to say that the split deployment becomes the default. For anyone who's running Contour now, this probably is neither news nor kind of like a big deal to you, because when we say the default is that if you go to the README and it says, kube control install j.heptio.io, that is what we inside the team colloquially call the default, because it's the one that you just copy and paste. What's going to happen is that we're going to push people to, if you're installing Contour, you're going to be installing it in this split deployment mode, because that is the most reasonable one that we think that Contour should be deployed in. The old model of just everything in 2 containers in 1 pod was very simple to get going 2 years ago when this project started. But realistically, if you're using this thing in anger, you definitely want to have the life cycle of your contours and envoys separated, and you definitely probably want to be looking at how your envoys are resourced and how they're deployed inside your cluster in more specifically than just, oh, they're just a bunch of replicas that are just stuffed on free machines. So that's the big plan that we're going to, like, some specific stuff that we're going to continue to work on to make that split deployment story the one that we go out with in 1.0, because we think that this is I had to pull myself back from saying the right way, but this is certainly a strong recommendation for, if you just want to deploy Contour, get started with it. This is a way that's going to work for you very well. So those are the kind of what's coming up. I want to pass over for the people watching at home. How potentially can you get involved here? We have a bunch of issues that we tackle. We call them help wanted or good first issue. Help wanted and good first issue are mostly synonyms, but help wanted is if someone has a particular set of skills in that area. Good first issue is, as it says, a good first issue. They're usually good first issues usually are more well specified. For example, we have one that says when Go 1.13 is released, upgrade is to Go 1.13. That's just a bit of copy and replace, and making sure that the Docker binaries are in the right place, and like kind of just semi-mechanical translation. The help wanted ones that are not labeled good first issue potentially have a little bit more analysis that needs to be done. Like we still need to talk about, well, exactly how do we want to add this feature or fix this particular limitation, but it's not entirely clear how to do it. But for both these issues, these are ways, if you're looking to get involved in the project, you're looking to contribute, this is one of the best ways to start. So there's a link in the show notes that'll take you straight to it. I think, yeah, this is for beta 1. I can probably update that to be across all the milestones that we have open. But just on that, contribution, I say with my open source hat fully on, is not just about code. It is about bug reports. It is about experience report. It is about typos in the documentations. It is about beating us up in Slack when things that we say are not clear. Contribution is a much broader scope than just I sent some code. Don't think that just because you're not an experienced Go developer or you don't have experience in this project that there's nothing that you can contribute. That is completely false. Use of this product, like telling us how it worked for you or failed to work for you in anger, is as valuable as code, more valuable than code. Like we can type code all day, but you need to give us your feedback about how the product is not working for you. That is definitely a contribution that we want to hear. You can come find us in Slack. You can raise issues. You can come up. I almost said we had a mailing list. We don't, because I got rid of it. But you can speak up in this chat and let us know. And with 15 minutes and change, this is probably the time to do that, to open the floor for feedback, for discussion, for questions.
Yeah, I just want to reiterate what Dave said here. It's really important that we understand all your use cases as well. So we do have an issue. It's issue 1269. If you want to add in your use case there, or if you would rather just chat with us about your use case, it's super important for us and the team and the community to understand how Contour is being used. So please add your voice here. It means a lot to us.
Hey, so I feel like I'm monopolizing the call, but I'll raise one other one because I've been encouraged to do so by Josh Rosser. So one of the things we've got plans, obviously beyond Contour, for Envoy, and we're a RHEL 7 shop, which I guess is fairly common in enterprise land. So it's always been a battle to try and compile Envoy on RHEL 7, but we're successfully doing that now. And so one of the things that Matt Klein raised a while ago, Matt being the creator of Envoy, is, and there is an open issue on this, is the kitchen sink nature of the Envoy images. So today Envoy is built with every extension compiled in. So, and I've got a color-coded list here that I think I sort of dazzled Josh and Alex with. But if you look at the list of extensions that we think that Contour uses, it's a very small number that we know for sure are currently used today. There are some that we believe are coming down the pipe, so that includes things like CORS, external auth, and these sort of things, which are features that are captured in the issues list. But then there's a whole bunch of crap that is not needed. Hot restart, a lot of the gRPC bridge stuff back and forward, thrift, Zookeeper extensions, Hystrix, StatsD, Datadog, go on and on, light separate. So there's a whole bunch of stuff compiled in. And so our question to them was, would you support us running our own Envoy, compiled Envoy, with all that stuff compiled out, but tagged to a 1.11.1? I think the answer was no, and it's not a deal breaker, but I just want to put that out there. At some point, we'll probably want to get to bring our own Envoy that's got all of that unused code, which we see, our cyber team see as just code waiting to be exploited. We want to get that out of Envoy and run a stripped down version.
I hear you. The feature set that Contour needs from Envoy is very small, and honestly is not changing at this point. The changes are like, what was it, like a Dubbo, which is some
it's like Chinese RPC.
Yeah, I mean, those things are great, but they're not particularly relevant to us. Right. In terms of like the official, will you support that? That's probably a discussion we should have off this call. But sure. Okay, there are two things that I want to say. One part of the reason. One thing I didn't talk about for split deployment is that it gives us the ability to run those two containers in different service accounts. So Contour needs the ability to watch secrets, blah, 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 blah. Envoy doesn't need any of that. And so part of the reason for splitting that out, and one of the things that Joe has been pushing me for a long time is, can we make Envoy run with no service account? Can we give it no permissions to talk to the API at all? This is kind of like a double underpants thing of Envoy has this big surface area through all these extensions. Can we mitigate what happens if it gets exploited? The other one about coming back to your own Envoy. One thing that, as you said, compiling Envoy is a big job. I've never managed to do it successfully, and I think we get a lot of loss in this team for not taking the ownership of building and shipping our own Envoy.
Sure.
Maybe that's not a forever position, but it's certainly the one that we have now, because deploying Envoy. But
well,
I don't. I mean, so to not to cut you off, but the feature sets that we need to be compiled out of Envoy, like it either works or it doesn't. Like Envoy is going to say that when you remove an extension, you literally cut off an arm of the gRPC that the message is translated into. Just like this extension isn't enabled.
Right.
The other thing that I want to add, I know it says very very strongly in our release guidelines. We require this version of Envoy. It is mainly to limit the mix and match. Like it can't just be any version of Envoy and any version of Contour, because the Envoy project continually changed their gRPC structure. The reason why we need them to be in such close thing is that like they will change. Like for example, between Envoy 1.8 and 1.9, they totally changed. Like there was no backwards compatibility between the gRPC. So we're forced in this mode of this particular version of Contour works with that particular version of Envoy. This later version of Envoy requires this later version of Contour.
Yeah. That makes total sense.
Yeah, there don't seem to be any practical reasons why you couldn't build your own Contour at the same release level.
Yeah, because
that's really what affects the. But in terms of like the capital S support, that's really something that we probably need to talk about offline. But there are no structural reasons why that wouldn't work.
So I guess what would be interesting, and I'm happy to do this through any sort of, I don't actually think it's a good idea, any sort of forum. Josh is suggesting GitHub. It may even just be a Docker thing. It'd be interesting, like I've taken a stab at what I believe is actually required either now or potentially in the future and is never required. It'd be interesting just to get, the core team to cast their eye over that and see if I'm missing anything. And then I'd be happy to do some testing. Like, we can sort of roll that into our engineering environment. We'll build it based on an Envoy 1.11.1 tag and make sure it matches the Contour version as well. But just someone casting an eye over that list of extensions we compile out would be helpful as a starting thing, and we can do some testing.
I don't think it's unreasonable that us as a project that provides a tool that requires Envoy, we should have a list of the extensions we need. I don't think that's unreasonable, and I'm making a note that we should just do that. That seems completely reasonable. Okay. One other thing that is going on is there is it's not a fork, it's a separate branch of Envoy that is building against OpenSSL rather than boring SSL. So I think perhaps one of the and that will then create a separate flavor of Envoy. This is being driven. It's Envoy project / OpenSSL. I think that's the GitHub.
I think it's crazy, but
some people believe that OpenSSL contains magic FIPS compliance magic, which allows them to comply with FIPS things. I don't take any position on that, but perhaps there is that opens the door for a discussion of using Envoy in the load balancer story. We need n set of extensions. Can we please have a spin of it for that? Like we have so many different spins of it already for the different base images it's built on. Can we just have one more? So maybe that's a way of approaching, which would free potentially both of us from having to build our own Envoys.
Yeah, and obviously there's companies like Tetrate sort of getting into this get Envoy sort of game as well, and maybe you can go through a checkbox, but that still wouldn't work for us. But in theory, they could maybe put out different builds. The other thing is, as I went through this analysis, I actually need to go back to the Envoy guys, and I plan on doing this. I plan on raising an issue because there are some extensions which are in the extension list that you can compile out that actually don't represent themselves in the output when you start Envoy. So I'm gonna go back and raise issues for those, because it'd be nice to have what's in or out, exposed by the standard out as it starts. But I'll do that on the Envoy side.
Excellent. I'm not aware of any kind of dynamic loading like dynamically loading. I don't think dynamic loading is a word that Mac client uses. So yeah, the extension list is baked into the image that you build.
That's coming with the WASM stuff that they're about to put in.
Yeah. I don't know if that will apply retrospectively to every extension, or if it's just going to be like new special extensions that can be loaded.
I think it's new special. Yeah, I don't think they're going to go on backport. It's too big a surface area.
Okay, so I hear you clearly. We've got a list of required extensions that we need. I'll go raise that issue there, and Josh and I can talk about what it means to bring your own Envoy. From our point of view, like, as I said, like we don't provide Envoy. We just point you very strongly to an image over there on the Docker Hub.
Yeah.
So it seems reasonable. Like I'm sure you understand that like in our release notes we have to make it as simple as possible.
Oh, totally understand.
In reality, with sophisticated deployments, we can speak about things we require rather than just names.
And I think that we're clearly an outlier that would want to do something like this, but we've got different cyber requirements than most, I guess.
I hear. I also think it's a good practice to not just have the whole thing compiled in all the time, and especially the things that are being added to Envoy are not are for stuff that is more in the service mesh or traffic proxy kind of thing, where we're just straight up HTTP.
Yeah. Cool. Thanks.
Well, it's 7 minutes to the top of the hour, and it's a race between is my battery going to go flat or are we going to get to 9 o'clock? I have my Zoom appliance at the ready.
Yeah, awesome. Was there anything else you wanted to add in regarding the good first issues there?
Other than I'll correct that link to be a little. It points to the current milestone, because one of the things is contributions in the current milestone is the important one. Like a contribution that we're not planning on merging for a couple of months is a bit deflating for everybody. So definitely when you go to GitHub, your good first issue and labels, I think there are even like the GitHub API integrates with that very well. Like it says, looking to contribute, try these labels. I'm pretty sure it says that on the PR interface or on the issue interface, but those are the quasi standards that we follow. So we're many of our issues, especially the longer running ones, are not what I classify as good first issues. Like they either have a lot of back and forth and are very easy to follow what the state of things. They can be very nerdy and deep and technical. They're not great issues to start with, but for things that I do recognize are good ways to get started contributing to the project, we label them as such, and I kind of suggest to the rest of the people on the team, hey, don't put your time into that. That's a good one for someone else to pick up. And if we get to the end of the cycle and like they haven't been done, we'll polish them off. But very much we want to make available work that people can contribute and get started easily in the project.
Cool, thank you.
I'll just point out, because I just thought of it, when Nick joined, when everyone joins the team, one of the first things they go through is the contributing document themselves, and they always have improvements. So Nick did a bunch of improvements to the contribution document. It is a little bit long. This is always the battle with every open source project, the verbosity versus completeness. But I'm pretty proud of our contributing document. Like it tells you how to get started, and in terms of being able to contribute, like get the code, build the code, and do a PR, we put a lot of time and effort into that process. So we feel it's pretty smooth. So Michael and I joked about how hard it was to build Envoy from scratch. I don't think our project applies to that. Like the part about making the changes about changing the code, not about the pantomime of building and pushing the release and making sure you've done it correctly. Like we put a lot of time into our PR process, so we want that to be smooth for everybody.
Awesome, thank you. I also linked to the contributing doc in the chat there if anyone wants to read through it. As Dave said, it's very extensive, very detailed. Any other questions from the community on this community call? All right, then I think we're going to close it up. I want to thank everyone from the Contour team for being here and explaining all the work that goes into Contour. Thank you so much. And I want to thank the community members, and I want to call out Michael here for the great questions today. So thank you so much for being here. And with that, yeah, I'm going to end the call. Thank you, everyone, and have a fantastic week.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks a lot. It's been great.
Thanks, everyone.
Appreciate it. Bye now.
Good one. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.